All right, let's run through another Mtel question. This one says, use the sequence below to answer the question that follows. We've got something called the Mandelbrot sequence, and the sequence is listed below. And it says, when C equals I, how many of the first 4 terms of this sequence have a non-zero real part? Okay, so one of the main concepts here is I, and I is a letter that we use to represent the imaginary number square root of -1. So I is an imaginary number because it doesn't actually exist. There's no way to represent the square root of -1. We can't take the square root of a negative number because the definition of a square root is a number times itself that equals the number under the square root, right? And to get a negative number by multiplication, we need a positive and a negative number, so we need 2 different numbers. So there's no way we can multiply something times itself to equal a negative number. So we use I to represent a situation where we end up with that impossible situation. So the question is asking is how many of the first 4 terms, which are listed here, have a non-zero real part? So something that's not imaginary. So the first term being C, and since C equals I, we can just replace every single C that we see here with an I. So we can just pretend all these C's are I's. The first term is by definition an imaginary number. The first term is just I, and I is an imaginary number, so this first term does not have a real part. Then if we look at the second term, we've got C squared plus C. Well, we just said that C is definitely not real. Now we have to figure out if C squared is real. So C squared is just I squared. So let's think about if we square I. Well, if we take the square root of -1 and we square it, what that does is gets rid of the square root sign, because squaring something and square rooting something are opposite operations and they cancel each other out when you do them to each other. So what we get here is -1, and -1 is a real number. So anytime we are squaring C, we're going to have a real part. And every single term after the first term has C squared happening. So all of these terms after the first term are going to have a real part because we're going to end up squaring I, which is going to give us a real number. So the answer to this one is C, 3 terms.